Don't record yet. Let's see if I sent you the right one. Dan, do you want to do a quick sound check while we're waiting for people to log on? You're muted. Let's see.
Yeah, see, that's why we do sound checks.
That's what we do. So Dan, we have 48 people on right now. We have 155, 160 registered. So if everyone's comfortable, maybe we could just wait a couple minutes. What do you think?
Well, here's what I would do. I would wait like maybe 1 minute, let everybody in, and then say and then tell them we'll be starting shortly as more people join.
Okay, great.
So they don't, yeah.
They're listening to you, by the way. All of those people are listening to you already.
Oh, they can hear me right now?
Yeah. Have any good jokes? Sorry.
Well, you know, not when you've got TPO on the line. I don't really think any of my jokes are going to go over very well. So.
Nice, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. So everyone, it's quickly, if you don't mind waiting a minute more, we're up to 60 attendees right now. So, and people are, and more.
Oh, there they are. I see them there. So they're not in a waiting room right now.
No, they're all coming on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're coming on fairly rapidly here. So. Just realized my. Well, why don't we get started? Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Baldwin. I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Monterey County and the titular head of the COVID-19 collaborative, which means that I take a lot of instructions from others, and including Kim Stemler, and who has helped organize this webinar today. We are all trying to figure it out, and it's still changing on a fairly regular basis. What to do in our workplaces, what should mask requirements be? Are we all back in the office yet? Are we working in hybrid situations? What are the legal implications of the decisions that we make? So, and then how best to just support employees. So we're grappling with that at the Community Foundation, and we've decided, and I'm interested to hear how it goes today. We've decided that there are still too many unknowns, and so our offices are open to the public. We do require masks, even though they're not mandated, and the staff that is working is we have staff rotating in and out, and everyone wears masks in public spaces out in the office. So that's where we've landed, and it'll be really interesting to hear today what the trends are. Lastly, of course, I'm really pleased, and the collaborative that we've put together and has been together for 9 months, 10 months, I think has contributed to the the lower infection rates in Monterey County. Kim Stemler has a lot to do with that through all her work with vaccinations, but then so do the community health workers through the VITA program. This is all very coordinated, but I feel like we're on a little bit of an island, and with what's going on in other parts of the country. So there are so many unknowns, and so it's very helpful to get expert advice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who is going to introduce Melissa, who will be leading our webinar today. Thank you all for being here. Kim?
Thank you, Dan, for your leadership, which is amazing. So first, I'm going to introduce, I'm going to tell you about the webinar a little bit, okay? One, we're recording. We will be posting this webinar to YouTube, and I'll send out the link to everyone at the end of this meeting. Secondly, we have two wonderful interpreters with us, Maricela and Avilia. So as Maricela posted, if you need Spanish, go to interpretation, click down, and you can change the language that you hear this into Spanish. And then if Maricela happens to be speaking in Spanish at some point during a question or answer, and you want to hear the English interpretation of that, you can switch to, or if she interprets somebody that's speaking Spanish, you can actually go to interpretation and click on English. And then really, luckily, Melissa's talking most of this time, but we want to hear from you. We want to know what your questions are. So while she and I, and again, it's mostly her, are doing the presentation, we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I can monitor both. And then at the end, you can raise your hand and we'll actually let you speak and hear your voice and try to respond to your questions. So we are so honored to have Melissa volunteer again to help us figure out just how to run a business during really challenging times. Melissa Irwin is a nationally certified senior professional in human resources with a California specific designation, as well as a Society for Human Resource Management senior certified professional. She's worked with TPO for the past 20 years as a presenter, a facilitator, and a consultant, specializing in employment regulations, as well as communication and leadership techniques with both employees and key managers. Over the past 18 plus months, Melissa has become an expert on COVID-related workplace regulations, and we really appreciate your workplace expertise. And one of the things that just made her so special in the last webinar, and I think makes her special in general, is these regulations are very confusing, even more than normal business operation regulations. She's able to take all of the confusion, make it clear, and then interpret it so it's usable and friendly for us. And Melissa, you're awesome. Thank you. So I'll just quickly then start. It doesn't look like anybody has questions about process, so we'll start. The Monterey County COVID Collaborative actually puts together weekly vaccination site flyers and now weekly testing site flyers. And we also put together a website called MontereyCountyVaccines.com that you're welcome to go to on your own computer. So if you ever need this.
Looks like this, if you want to see
good,
that,
thank
everyone.
you. You can easily find either a map, you can find flyers for your region. If you scroll down, Melissa, a little further down that page, we have a list of all the ongoing vaccination sites in the county. And there are a lot. Right now, there's no excuse for access is no longer an excuse for getting vaccinations. We have quite a few vaccination availabilities throughout. Testing, there are quite a few PCR opportunities. So where they go to the lab, that is accessible. What is not quite as accessible, but with the COVID Collaborative's VITA partnership with the county, we're trying to expand the availability of rapid testing. So look for more on that. If you're not on our weekly mail list, just send me a note or put your name in, send me a little note here or send me an email and I'll make sure that you get the weekly testing and vaccine flyers. So that's enough there. Melissa, was there, I think Was there one other thing, or are we turning it over to you?
I think we can turn it over unless you
Awesome.
wanted to say how successful the Big Mac campaign went.
The Big Mac campaign, I actually don't know the count, but I know, so there's lots of novel ideas that have gone across the US, and one that happened in the state, and then also that our county replicated in partnership with the owner of several South County McDonald's, is on Sunday, there was a vaccination clinic at McDonald's in Greenfield, and everybody that got vaccinated got a Big Mac. When, I don't know the number, but when we did this with testing at that same McDonald's, it was very successful. So Big Macs drive vaccinations and testing is what we're learning. And hopefully we'll do one of those in Soledad soon too, as well.
I thought that was pretty creative. Thank you. That's a really great resource. I know at TPO, we always share with each other the weekly sites for the vaccination and for the testing sites. So that's really helpful. Thank you so much for pushing that out. All right, so I think we'll just go ahead and get started. And the topic is current COVID protocols, current being the catchphrase here, in that it has been a year and a half of a lot of struggles and challenges, and we're still here. We're doing it. Everyone who's on this call, you've chosen to put one foot in front of the other and try to get the information the best that you can, make the best business decisions that you can. And I really appreciate that. I know it is not easy. For those of you who don't know about TPO, maybe you weren't on the program 3 months ago. I can't believe that was 3 months ago, but TPO is an HR consulting firm. We're here in Monterey, and we build confident leaders and support positive HR outcomes. Really, our clients mirror those that are on this call today that I so far can see, and based on past participation. The organizations we work with are nonprofits, for-profits, public sector, private sector, small businesses with 5 employees and an owner who's pulling their hair out because they're confused, large organizations with more than 1,000 employees who just need a little bit more support, and all industries, whether it's agriculture, hospitality, whether it's manufacturing, retail. And the commonality here is that these are organizations that are really struggling to figure out how to best run a business, be a good place to work, have good employees, interact with the customers, clients, the people you do business with in a way that also resonates, all while keeping on top of so much change out there, particularly when it comes to COVID. So I thank you, Monterey County COVID Collaborative, for inviting me back for this program. I really appreciate it. And we're happy to support the community. This is one of many community programs that we've done. Our agenda today is well, we didn't know about this when we first when we created this time slot, but the program will cover the new President Biden's vaccine mandate announcement. We're going to talk about that to the degree we can. Spoiler alert, we don't know a whole lot. Number 2, we'll talk about what is the current masking status out there. Requiring vaccinations, should you make them mandatory? Should you not? Are you required to have them mandatory because of the industry or location that your organization is in? The current best resource for updates when it comes to COVID, I want to really share that with you, as well as isolation and quarantine. So what I have found is that over the year and a half, there's so much information. And do you go to the federal CDC? Do you go to the state CDPH? Do you go to Calosha? Do you go to Osha? What are the locations we go to get our information? And the volumes and reams of paper that the information could be contained on is so vast. So really trying to provide the resources that can get you the most information as quickly as possible, knowing that it's a huge topic. A 45-minute webinar or a 2-page document can't possibly encompass all of the technical and often convoluted areas relating to COVID. So the first thing I want to say is that's because one size does not fit all. So the information relating to COVID is really going to depend on a few things. Are you in a state or in a county or in a city that operates differently than elsewhere? And so we'll talk, this is obviously Monterey County COVID Collaborative. We work with clients primarily in the Santa Cruz, San Benito, Monterey, tri-state counties, but certainly even into the Bay Area counties, and then other states as well. And as you know from reading the news, it is a completely different ball game in other parts of the county, state, and the nation as well. So Dan, I do appreciate when you said sometimes it feels like we can be on an island, and that is true. We have different experiences all around. Then we also have to look at what industry are we in. So some industries do have some requirements, healthcare for one, schools, congregate settings like homeless shelters, government contractors, public sector. Each industry will have its own, or can have its own, rules and requirements. You know, some of the parameters around the schools and what is happening when it comes to symptoms, testing, etc. in schools, it's different than in other parts of our community, and there are reasons around that. So we have to look at what industry are we on, and then even what size of an employer. So these breakdowns that I have, these four categories, are purposeful. They will tie into each of them into another part of the program. But if you're the 1 to 25 employer, the 26 to 99 employer, the 100 through 499 employer, or the 500 plus, that is going to determine what leaves you have to provide to employee, what time away from work, and whether that is paid or not. So we'll look into that. I just want to really acknowledge that on this call, we have people who are here from the county of Monterey. That's much different operation than, again, the restaurant with 15 employees or the cafe. So one size does not fit all. And at TPO, what we're doing as HR consultants is helping clients to work through the employment side of COVID. So I can't speak to you about the customer side. That is not my area. I'm in the area of HR, of human resources. And as an HR consultant, I can help provide the information for dealing with employees in the workplace. Okay, so when it comes to questions, Kim did say to type those into the question feature or the chat, and I have them both up too. You'll see me look down occasionally. If there's a question that's asking a clarifying question to something I'm speaking about, I'll try to answer it, or Kim will interrupt and I'll try to answer it. But if it's something not related to that topic, we'll be leaving it for later in the program. We also, a reminder to myself to make sure I'm sensitive to the interpreters on the line. I'm going to slow it down just a tad. Some of the acronyms and language is really complex and dense to translate and to interpret. So I really appreciate the work that's being done there as well. So let's just start it off. The first thing on our list was, what about President Biden's September 9th announcement? And you'll see right off the bat, the image is "stay tuned, coming soon," because this isn't something that is passed today and in effect today. What this is that the federal, so this is the federal level, and then we're going to take it down to the state, and then we're going to take it down to the county. But on the federal level, workplace safety officials, in particular OSHA is what it's called, OSHA, will soon, when is that? Tomorrow? In a week? In 6 weeks? We don't actually know the answer to that, but we'll soon issue mandatory vaccine rules for employers. A big piece of this is with the employers that have over 100 employees. And so this was part of President Biden's path out of the pandemic approach. And one of the big areas to it is to get the 80 million workers that work for employers with 100 or more employees. And this is going to require that those who are unvaccinated will require weekly negative tests, or they can get vaccinated and not have to test. So what they're calling that is the test out. So it requires vaccination unless the employee tests out negative weekly. And part of that plan is that paid time off will be required for employees to get the vaccine and to recover from any side effects. And I know you have a lot of questions. I know you're going to say, how do you define 100 employees? We don't know. How is this going to be paid for exactly? We don't know. There is a lot of we don't knows. What has to happen is OSHA has to create what's called the emergency temporary standard, but on the federal level, and they will provide information. There also are additional requirements for federal contractors. So there already are requirements for vaccination status for federal contractors, but it will go a step further. The same with federal government employees and for healthcare workers. But you have to kind of take this with the idea that this is federal. State already has their own, sometimes has their own requirements already in place, or might soon be coming down to have changes near in the future. So I don't know if you're aware that not all states have a state OSHA. This is the Office of Safety and Health Administration. So not all states have an OSHA. California has Calosha. And when you hear me say Calotia, that is specifically referring to California. So California has their own OSHA. Some other states do as well. And in that situation, what happens is the federal government will create their OSHA ETS, and then the state will have the opportunity to either get into compliance with federal, or in a line, I should say, with federal minimally within usually 15 to 30 days after the OSHAs. So from a timeline perspective, we're looking at many weeks out into the future. And this information is just literally changing daily. I actually have not looked at the news today, but as of last night at about 11 o'clock in the evening, when I last was looking into this information, we did not have new guidelines on what the actual timeframes will be. So,
Melissa, oh, excuse me. We've gotten some questions, and I think I know the answer is you're not sure, but let's try them. Is that okay? Okay.
And I'm sorry, believe me, if we knew, we would help you out. It is very, very, I understand, very confusing. I don't want people to get too overwhelmed by it. I will say before you go into those couple of questions, Kim, is that one aspect of this that has been put out there that I thought was really interesting is that we all aren't going to agree on whether anything I talk about today is right or wrong, is enough, is too much. We already know that we all don't agree on this, and that's not the purpose of this program. It's really just to provide information. One piece of information that I thought was really interesting was, because companies have been reluctant to require vaccination, that the federal government has stepped in to require it, even at this 100+ level, takes a little heat off of the employers, where they don't have to then feel that they are making the decision. So that was an interesting component of how this new announcement might positively impact employers. All right, let's go with the question, Kim. What did you have?
Okay, so Norm asks, with weekly testing requirement, is the employer required to schedule those testing appointments, or will the employees be responsible for maintaining a weekly schedule? And then I've also heard, and then who is responsible for the cost under the federal program?
We'd love to have all of those pieces of information. So I can't speak to the federal new program at all because we don't have those answers. But we can look at, well, what are some of the other requirements for vaccinations right now? And even I think if you broaden it up and say when it comes to testing, was it the employees who were scheduling it or the employer? And most typically that is the employee who is scheduling it, because that's just usually how it works. I know I have many clients who are happy to help their employees. You have to be a little careful on that with the testing. If the testing site is asking for any kind of medical information in order to make that appointment, that can really quickly come into an issue of confidentiality pretty quickly. So it is not, readily set up of how is that going to be scheduled? How is it going to be paid for? Well, we don't have that answer on the federal level, but on the state level in California, we know that usually when it is a requirement that the employee do something, that the employer is paying for that. So that still is yet to be seen, and yet to be seen on what kinds of incentives or payroll tax credits might be extended in the future. So just not quite sure in general not sure at all on the new federal, but for other areas of California, if the employer is requiring something, then the employer is paying for that.
Great. And then if I can ask one other question, and I think it's going to be the same answer, but and so let's talk about this. For the federal stuff, if we don't know the answers, I'm collecting the questions. Once we know the answers, we'll put together something and send it out to you. We'll send it out to all participants.
What I would recommend is there will be a ton of information that comes out with this new 100+ requirement. And what you'll want to do, just like we did a year and a half ago, is you'll go to the source. So OSHA will put out their emergency temporary standards. That will then domino down. California will either modify what they already have or alter that in some way. And so the recommendation will really be to go straight to that government agency and read their information. When it comes to Calosha, for example, we do have our own emergency temporary standards, and it has a lot of great FAQs, and those we can expect will be modified if the federal level continues. What did I just say? If the federal level continues, is there any possibility it can't or it won't? Some would say that there is an argument that court cases can be put up that would stop the federal standard from coming into effect. So that is for attorneys to figure out. I'm not an attorney. So what I would say from an HR perspective is to know what's out there on the landscape. Don't get paralyzed by that just yet, but know that what's coming up on there on the landscape, and decide, do you want to put in any measures before that comes down? So we'll continue to talk about that a little bit more as we continue on.
And so the one other question is from Jen Johnson. If your organization is not contracted directly with a federal agency, but receives federal funds through a local jurisdiction, would that third party, that family relationship thing, third party connection, define your organization as a federal contractor and thusly make your organization subject to compliance regulation?
And we know that's another question, is what is a contractor? Usually contractors and subcontractors would be included. There's often a dollar amount that carries with it for that or an employee count. So those are things that we're waiting to see. Absolutely. And I get everyone's wanting to know now so they can make plans. We just don't know yet. So it's a blip on the radar right now. We'll see how this comes in the future. So I wasn't expecting to talk about the federal presidential announcement, because that wasn't even on the horizon when we started this program. And things change really quickly when it comes to COVID. Let's go to the next topic, which is always another area where people have some really strong opinions. Right now, the federal CDC and the California CDPH, there I go, going really quickly. Interpreters, I apologize. CDC is the Center for Disease Control. CDPH is the California Department of Public Health, as well as Monterey County. There is a recommendation that people wear masks indoors regardless of vaccination status, but it is not a mandate at this point. So that is not true when you look at our neighbors to the north and certainly up into the Bay Area. If you are in Santa Cruz, where I call home, Santa Cruz County, then there is an indoor masking mandate regardless of vaccination status. But in Monterey County, as an employer, you're left with making a decision. Is this something that you want to have masks required for all persons? You can do that. Even though it's not a mandate, an employer, a business can choose to have that as their policy. Is it going to be that masks are optional for vaccinated persons? Is it no masks unless you're fully vaccinated? These are your choices. And I did actually get these posters. These images were from the Monterey County Health Department's website. So if you're looking for signage and you're trying to figure out still what it is you're doing, or you're changing your signage, then those you can find on the Monterey County Health Department's website. So not a mandate at this point. What will happen tomorrow or the next day or the day after of that, I certainly don't know.
If I may, it is a mandate for unvaccinated, though. Let's be clear about that. Unvaccinated are mandated by the state to wear masks in public places. It's just vaccinated that are not mandated.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's fair enough. Absolutely. So it is another one of those areas where people have different opinions. And I really want to make sure from an HR perspective that if employees are wanting to wear masks inside, whether they're vaccinated or not, they just want to wear them, there can be no retaliation for that. They have to be allowed, of course, to wear masks without any kind of retaliation or any snide comments to that effect. So that is the deal with masking. I would love to know where you all stand. What kinds of a sign are you having out front or in your workplace? This is going to be something that really has changed. You might also choose to not have any sign at all, and you just figure people will figure it out. They're adults, they can figure it out, or you choose the signage. A lot of different choices here, a lot of different opinions. All right, so let's go on to vaccinations. So California, so this is apart from the federal Biden announcement, but just in California, does already require vaccination in certain situations. They do allow for a test out option. In the healthcare industry, that's a requirement for vaccinations. After 9/30 this month, after September 30th, then the test out option will no longer be available. Public sector has a requirement for vaccination or test out. Large indoor venues, which is the 1,000 plus for large indoor venues. And then our schools as well. So we already know, many of our employees and individuals already know about this vaccination requirement with also the test out that's available. So if you aren't in one of those groups where vaccination is required, you're an employer who just has a choice. You can be silent on vaccination. We have clients who are silent on it. They don't want to impart their opinion one way or the other. They don't want to get into any of these issues. You can choose to inform employees and even recommend vaccination, but stop short of requiring it. We have many clients that are in that category where they do want to provide the information. They have flyers up, they might email people information, they might share the vaccination sites, they might let people know about the Big Mac that's in Greenfield. Greenfield, was that correct, Kim? So a lot of organizations will inform, and maybe leadership is very visual about showing that they themselves have been vaccinated. That's an option. Pros and cons to all of these. And then the third option, of course, is to require vaccination. So there are employers who are not required to have the vaccination mandate, but they are choosing voluntarily for their organization to require vaccination. I will say there's been some reluctance to do so because employers were really concerned about, if we require a vaccine, could that be seen as somehow discriminatory against our employees? Could it be seen as a violation of their rights? Could there be a lawsuit saying it wasn't appropriate for an employer to require it? And probably the other big one was the concern that when the vaccines were not FDA approved, and now that we are looking at FDA approval, at least for Pfizer right now, employers have shifted. Some employers have shifted, and they have moved to the require. I think also as employers look around and see other industries are requiring it, and now with this federal announcement, that might also have some employers go the require route that weren't doing so before. So I would really like to know where you all sit on this. I wish I could do a poll and say, for your organization, where are you? What's your organization's view? And these are difficult business decisions. Organizations who aren't required to do the vaccination, you get to decide. And as you decide, you're looking at, how will my employees feel about this? If you wanted to go all the way to number 3 to require it, how far would you go? Would you tell an employee that they can't work unless they have the vaccination? And for many of our organizations, we need the bodies to work. So that has been a concern as well. So we see some movement here. And then the really big one for if you're going to require vaccination is that accommodations must be considered if there is a disability and or if there's a sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance. And that is true also for, if I go backwards a slide, for wherever vaccinations are required, we always look at, is there a disability or a sincerely held religious belief or practice that causes the employer to need to either make an exception or to actually consider the reasonable accommodation process, which that process, and it is a process, is listening to what the employee, what their accommodation, what accommodation they are requesting, and how you might be able to meet that accommodation. For example, maybe someone says, I need an accommodation, but I could test out once or twice a week, or I could work from home, or I could, be in that office where no one else is, or many other options. This area causes a lot of concern for employers, because if you require the vaccination and you have to pause and consider accommodations for disability or for religion, that is a process that some employers are still a little nervous about. This is where you do want to also consider that legal opinion, view, support is going to be something you want to look at as well. So if an individual has a disability, you certainly can require and should require some kind of documentation that the healthcare provider is stating there is a disability that precludes the person from getting the vaccination and for what duration. That is completely reasonable to get something from a healthcare provider. The sincerely held religious belief is a little more complicated, because in that situation, the issue is really, is it sincere in the life of the possessor? Is it a sincere religious belief? And I don't think any of us want to be the one to determine whether someone's beliefs are sincere or not, or whether it's even a religion or not. That puts people, employers, owners, HR people, whoever is doing this process, into a position that can be really complicated. So you can require something from to substantiate the religious belief, practice, or observance. That's certainly something that you can require. The next question is, what do you do with that once you get it? Would you deny the accommodation request? And that gets pretty tricky. So,
Melissa, can I, and Norm asked this question, I think you saw it, you responded to his question so well. But this came up for me, not my employees, but others. The Catholic Church, the Pope, thinks people should be vaccinated. That is, he has made that statement. So for Catholics, and I don't mean to call out this religion, but it's an example of where the church itself, and a large church, says vaccination's okay, but a Catholic person's personal beliefs don't abide. And, I don't know, I didn't know what to say.
Well, and this is really complicated. So before that information came out from the Vatican, it kind of was a joke of, oh, you don't have to get a letter signed by the Pope saying you need an exemption. And so, yes, that's an example where that came out from the Catholic religion, and that part of that religion. There are other leaders in religions that are perhaps more commonly understood that have said the same thing. That said, religion is a huge area. There are so many different religions, and it doesn't have to be a religion that you or I know about. It's something in the life of the possessor that is that of similar to that of one who clearly qualifies. So this is just a complicated area, and I think the heart of the matter is employers are concerned that people are going to lie, and that can always happen. We know that. We know that. I'm sorry if I'm the one breaking it to you, but there are vaccination cards that aren't genuine, or somebody gets a letter from their healthcare provider and it's not really from their healthcare. These things do happen. Employers can reduce that possibility by having a process and specific forms that can reduce it a little bit. But in general, there are always going to be liars and cheaters out there. We make our policies, though, for our employees, which by far are good people who, if there really is a disability or religious belief, then considering an accommodation is absolutely appropriate. I just want to call out this issue that having a discussion with an employee about what their religion is and why or why not they believe in the vaccination is not where I'm going to recommend you spend your time. Rather, it's looking at, can that request be accommodated, and kind of moving forward on that. Okay, so accommodations. It's just a real key. Accommodation isn't a new concept. We've talked about accommodation for many, many years when it comes to employees being able to do their job, pausing and consider, is there a reasonable accommodation that can be made? So something to think about for your vaccinations. And this is going to, if you are a 100+ employer and you're looking ahead at the federal vaccine mandate, there will be exceptions for disability and religious belief. And what that one of those first exceptions is the test out option. So you can test once a week, and that is going to be fine. That's an example of a way to accommodate that. And some of you, I see a couple of comments are coming through with your opinions, and I get it. Some of you are really disappointed that Monterey County didn't do an indoor mask mandate. Others of you are happy that they didn't. This is an area that can be so polarizing for people. We're just trying to get the information, and business owners are trying to make the best decision that they can. Okay. Kim, any
Melissa, we
questions
have
on
a-
vaccination that you see?
No vaccination. There's a pending testing question.
Okay. We can go with that. That would
Okay.
probably fit right here.
Are there testing requirements for employees who've declined a vaccine based on pre-existing conditions or religious beliefs, but are not part of the required categories? So then the category would just be unvaccinated.
Right. So you're always having to look at, is there, what are the accommodations for people who have disabilities or religious? And testing might be an accommodation, working from home might be an accommodation. When it comes to the new federal mandate, testing is automatically an option for everyone, not just for those who have disability or sincerely held religious beliefs. Okay. So I'm going to hold on a couple questions I saw come through because I know I'm going to catch them on the next couple of slides. So vaccinations, and you know, these topics do change. What an organization had in play 3 months ago, they might choose to change, or the government might come in and choose to change it for them. These are certainly options that are out there. Okay, the next topic is going to be on focus on current updates. And so what this is about is that when we last met 3 months ago, the program was on Calosha emergency temporary standards. And those of you who were on that call, we had an individual from Calosha who talked about the safety side of things. And we were so excited because Calosha, and I still have it printed next to me, I always do, but June 17th, the Calosha Emergency Temporary Standards Frequently Asked Questions. And this was the go-to document to get your answers to things about how to address how you deal with isolation or quarantine. And it was a great document. Now, I would say our focus has shifted a bit because what the ETS, Calosha ETS said was, this is what's in effect unless the California Department of Public Health says otherwise, in which case we'll go with them. So that's really what has happened. That's what the shift has been. The focus now on the most current update that really is kind of the guider on here is the California Department of Public Health, September 9th, 2021 update. And this document is, it's not a very long document when you print it. It's about a 7-page document. And you can go to this website and that will, you can, I also have it on the next slide, but print it out at your desk. I have mine, it's printed out. I have highlights, I have notes, and it's kind of your go-to document. Kim, I'm sorry, I can't see from where I am. Are there handouts? Did you upload the PowerPoint handouts?
Sorry, Melissa, I didn't, but I will. And I'm
Okay.
actually getting the link for everybody now on this.
Perfect.
So
So
I will.
I can show you what this looks like. When you click that link, it's going to look like this on your screen, and it will take you to the September 9th, 2021. It's from the California Department of Public Health. And you might go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I think that updated the beginning of September and in August and in July. And you're right, it just keeps updating. And actually how I usually find out that this document has updated is I'm with a client on the phone saying, use this great new resource, and I'll see that it's updated right then. So the most current one is definitely the September 9th program. And on the PowerPoint handouts, when those are uploaded, all of the hyperlinks will work. So you will be able to, you can't click on your screen right now, but if you open the PDF of the handouts, you'll be able to click through to all of the links. So this is on my slide, that same document from the website. And what I do have circled here is it is the September 9th guidance. And that is really key that you know it's the September 9th guidance. The next slide that I have is really just showing you this area of the duration of isolation. So isolation is for people who are sick. Quarantine is for people who've been exposed to those who are COVID positive. So let's just first talk about isolation, to use that terminology. And the terminology here, I was thinking I could in my PowerPoint slide try to restate the duration of isolation. The problem is that there are several except this, if, then, this, that. So I wanted to actually have the exact language. So for the duration of isolation, it's people who are symptomatic are going to need to, sorry, clicked it a little bit there on accident. They can discontinue self-isolation after 10 days have passed, 24 hours since resolution of fever without the use of fever-reducing medications, and other symptoms have improved. So this is for symptoms, and occasionally, hopefully not too much, but it does happen. Some people need to isolate longer. They need to isolate maybe 20 days or even longer. This will be dependent upon your healthcare provider or the person's healthcare provider to determine. So people who have COVID-19 and are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have symptoms, but they know they tested positive, they also need to isolate for the 10 days. So that is the isolation. And some of you might be thinking, why are we talking about this 10 days again? We've known this for a long time, for over a year. You know, we've known about this. These questions are coming up again, at least to TPO, they're coming up again as we have more people who are ill, who are getting COVID, the Delta variant. And so these questions do come up. And it's really helpful to point to the document, which, you know, here's mine with the highlights and the underlines that shows what that duration is. The next part of this, of the guidance is for quarantine. So quarantine is for people who have had close contact with someone COVID positive. And remember that close contact is for less than 6 feet distance for 15 or more minutes, not necessarily consecutive. It can be cumulative in a 24-hour period. So the duration for people who have had close contact, and this is for unvaccinated persons, here's where this is new or newer-ish, new in the last several weeks, is that the CDC and California still recommend 14 days quarantine, but they say, we get it. We can let that be a little bit shorter. It can end after day 10 without testing. Or you can end it after day 7, which would mean day 8 or later, if a diagnostic specimen is collected on day 5 or later. If you're thinking, Melissa, that doesn't sound right, wasn't it before day 5? Yeah, that's what they changed though for the September 9th update. The September 9th update changed it to collected on day 5 or later from the date of the last exposure and test negative. So a couple things that are important about this piece of information is, first of all, it's a diagnostic specimen. So a diagnostic specimen is either the molecular test, the PCR, or the antigen test. This does not mention anything about trying to do an antibody test, which was a question that I was asked earlier if I would be addressing on this program. So this does say with a diagnostic specimen. And then the guidance goes on to say that for the remainder of the 14 days, that the individual still pays really close attention to if they get symptoms, which if they do, then they need to isolate, and that time could extend further, as well as these are for unvaccinated persons to continue to wear a mask around others, avoid crowds through day 14. So this was a big change And some of you will like that change, and others of you will think that that change is not so great. But this is the new for quarantine for unvaccinated persons, which has a testing component to it. The third area is going to be, well, what about the duration of quarantine for vaccinated persons or previously infected persons? So again, quarantine is when you've had close contact, which is less than 6 feet for 15 or more cumulative minutes in a 24-hour period. And it is for if they are fully vaccinated, then you are not required, and no symptoms, of course, then you're not required to quarantine. The same is true as if you've been previously infected and recovered, no symptoms in the past 3 months. So I think that certainly what I've seen is the duration of the quarantine for the people who are vaccinated. We understand as people are recovering from COVID, remembering that they will not have to quarantine, but it is only within the last 3 months. And then, of course, it's the same recommendation to continue for the full 14 days, the masking, the washing the hands, hopefully we're doing that anyway, avoiding crowds, and the other non-pharmaceutical interventions. If by chance a fully vaccinated close contact remains not having symptoms, you don't have to quarantine, but it does recommend you get tested 3 to 5 days after exposure. So that's a newer area too, where the state is saying you're vaccinated, you've been exposed, you don't have to quarantine, but we want you to really pay attention for 14 days. And we'd like you to go get tested on between days 3 and 5. Why? Because that's just to make sure that if perhaps there isn't a symptom, however, it is a positive, that then proper isolation would occur. So remember, if somebody tests positive, it's an isolation issue. And this is what can be so complicated. How long will your employees be out of work? And you might say, well, it's 10 days and you're done. Well, no, it could be 10 days and then they could end up maybe they're out 10 days because they had symptoms. Maybe they also have a close contact and they're quarantined. Maybe they then have another close contact and they're quarantined again. And this time they have symptoms and test positive. So it can be quite a bit of time. And from the employer perspective, I think what we're all hoping is that we reduce the amount of the possibility that somebody is infected and is coming to work. We also make sure if there's any type of a close contact exposure that individuals we're treating correctly, whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated or have recovered, depending on those different scenarios. Okay, so that is the CDPH, California Department of Public Health, guidance on quarantine. And I am just reminded in my own mind that I say that all very quickly. Interpreters, I am so sorry. It is really difficult for me to slow it down. It's such a dense topic. So I do appreciate, and I will try to be a little slower, particularly on the questions and answers that are coming up. Also, it takes some time for us just to digest the information. My goal is that I really do want to try to cut through all the information and try to make it a little bit easier to understand. But you have to be aware that it can't be so easy to understand that the details get lost. So it's a delicate balance. I'm sure we're going to have some questions around the quarantine and isolation, but I'm betting a lot of them are going to have to do with pay. As I look down, I can see a couple that are asking pay. So I think it makes the most sense to go to my last section of the program, which is about required time away from work. And again, this is not going to be about the federal program. We don't know what the federal government is going to do. But let's just kind of recap and talk about what are the types of time and pay available for COVID. And a couple things out here. This first bullet is there is the 2 weeks of required California 2021 COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave. That is for employers with 26 or more employees. That is set to end on September 30th in a mere however many days that is. Will that be extended? I don't know. Will a new bucket of time be provided to employees? I also don't know. That is information that I don't have any inside scoop on. I wouldn't be surprised. I think that when originally the California Supplemental Paid Sick Leave for 2021 was passed, one of the reasons it was passed is that on the federal level, the federal program became voluntary starting 2021. So that second bullet is federal. There was 2 weeks of voluntary federal COVID leave. We originally called that FFCRA, and then the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. But that is for employers with fewer than 500 employees. And it was voluntary for 2021. And that also ends September 30th, 2021. Will that be expanded? Well, I've got to believe we'll have to do something for the federal, the new federal 100 plus issue. But so far, we don't have any information on that either. So because the federal plan was voluntary, California came in with their paid required plan, but it does have these employee thresholds on it. This ends September 30th, 2021. If you want to keep up to date on when if those get either or both get extended, you'll hear that through many different resources just out there in the newspapers. Also for TPO, we've been doing Coven Alerts, and we are on number, off the top of my head, I don't know why this is escaping me, 68 maybe or so COVID alerts. So we will push that out to clients as well, as soon as we get that information. But from my examples I've given about how employees use the time for their own isolation, their own quarantine, not to mention to use it to care for a family member who is ill, or in California, California's case, and federal allows it as well, to use for vaccine, to get the vaccine or to recover from the side effects of the vaccine. The 2 weeks can be used up pretty quickly if it hasn't been already. So those are the COVID leave requirements. I would like to say that California does require that there be a poster for their California supplemental paid sick leave. It looks kind of like this. Technically for 2 more weeks, a couple more weeks, that needs to be up, and unless that gets revised. So those are the COVID leaves. Then the third bullet point is a reminder that there's just regular California paid sick leave. So if you have 1 or more employees in California, you're required to provide, it's not that it's actually an exact 3 days, but it's up to 3 days of California paid sick leave. Some employers will put 3 days, 24 times 3, 24 hours, 3 days. If your day is a 10-hour day, it would actually be 30 hours up front for the employee to use that bank of time. Others will use an accrual system, but up to 3 days of California paid sick leave is also still out there for employees who need to use that time. And then lastly is the Calosha Emergency Temporary Standard, which was our topic 3 months ago. is that when an employee is unable to work because of a workplace exposure. So if an employee gets exposed at work and then gets ill, if they're not able to come to work because of the exposure or because of a work-related illness, then Calosha requires that the employer continues to pay the employee for that time, even if the above items have already been exhausted. So that's what has been going on. What's next? You know, that last image of what's going to happen next. We're not out of the woods yet. Will there be requirement for additional pay for employees? I would guess so, but we just don't know what that looks like yet. And then there's required time away from work, where it's unpaid. And this is for employers, for the serious illness of the employee, like COVID long haul, for example, or where somebody doesn't recover from COVID in the typical 10-day period, it goes longer. So for the serious illness of an employee, or to care for a family member with a serious illness, there are 12 weeks of unpaid by the employer time. And here's a side note. The first is for California. California is for 5 or more employees. That's not a typo. It's 5 or more. If you thought, oh, I thought the 12-week leave was just for large employers, 50 or more employees. No, California changed that January of 2021, and it's 5 or more employees. If that's surprising to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, TPO has some great training programs on the time away from work that I would really recommend. And also, if you want to type in the into the chat or the question, hey Melissa, can you send me a recap of what those new CFRA requirements are? I'm happy to do so. So California has 5 or more employees. Federal still is at the 50 or more employees. And there is a requirement that the employee has to have worked 1,250 hours in the last 12 months. They have to have worked for you for at least a year. That doesn't have to be a consecutive year. It could be like multiple seasonal jobs for the same employer over many years can count towards 1 year of service. And during this leave, health insurance premiums are continued as they were before the leave. And there's a guaranteed right to return to that job. It's not paid by the employer, but the employee can receive money from EDD through state disability insurance or through the paid family leave insurance program, which again, that goes through the California EDD system. Okay, so those are the information about required time away from work. And with that, before we get to our questions, I'm going to say, keep up the good work. It's been such a challenging year and a half. Don't stop your good practices now. You may need to, if you have not done so already, update your safety plan. Your safety plan might have old symptoms on it from a year and 2 months ago. It might have old quarantine duration for people who are not vaccinated and who are vaccinated. You might have information on there that really has changed over time. So you want to make sure that whatever you're giving to your employees is up to date. And then, of course, there are other players involved. You know, safety, you've got to get whoever's in charge of your safety involved. Workers' compensation. If you have a positive employee, a COVID positive employee, contact your workers' comp carrier. Some of those comp carriers are wanting to know about every case that you know where an employee is positive. Other carriers just want to know if the employee has said, and I think that I got it at work. So I'm finding different carriers have a different way they want their clients to deal with the positives in the workplace. You need to be looking at your insurance carrier, particularly for these leaves where people are on a longer leave. How's that affecting health insurance premiums? EDD, California EDD, Employment Development Department. which that is for your state disability insurance, paid family leave, and unemployment insurance. There are huge payroll issues, the how to pay this time. There are IRS and accounting issues. How do you get money back from the federal payroll tax credit? And of course, the different agencies we've talked about. I think it's important for you to be provided some resources. So on the critical resources, and again, the PDF of the handouts is a click through, but the California Department of Public Health, which I have to tell you, I went to their website earlier this morning, and it seems they're doing a little bit of work because it wasn't quite pulling through. So who knows, maybe there's an update today that I'm not even aware of, as well as the isolation and quarantine. The Calosha ETS, really important. The Monterey County Health Department. If you have a location in San Benito County or Santa Cruz County or LA or Illinois, you have to go to where you have your employees to get the resources to make sure you're following them. The California Supplemental Paid Sick Leave, there are FAQs here, and if you did not have your poster up yet, you can click here to get your poster up. The Federal Center for Disease Control. Federal is great, but it's federal. So we need to, in California, follow California and then our local health department as well, whichever one best protects the employee. California Unemployment Assistance. So we might have some questions from people about unemployment. I'll do my best to answer those. The Labor Commissioner. So the Labor Commissioner gets involved when the issues are around pay. And so if you are requiring an employee to get tested, then the issue of pay for hourly employees, paying the employees time, mileage to get the test is going to come up. The California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, this is where people talk about where the government will have some Q&As that are really helpful. One of them will say, can my employer require to see my vaccine card? Yes, they can require proof of vaccine. It will say, can the employer require vaccines? And the answer will say, well, yes, but you have to always consider reasonable accommodation for disability or religious reasons. But it's a great resource where sometimes employees might say, you can't do that. And the answer back can be, oh, let me show you how the government has said that we can. IRS COVID, that comes down to how to get the tax credits back, the payroll tax credits for any COVID leave that you've paid. And then also TPO alerts. So we have, it does say 58 and counting on those alerts. We've got about 15 minutes left in the program, and the agenda was to cover unexpectedly President Biden's vaccine mandate. Didn't know we would be talking about that for 15 minutes. To re-look at masking status, requiring vaccinations, current best practices, where do we go for the update, and isolation and quarantine. So now we get to the fun part of remaining questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. So I'm going to go through the questions first that are pending, and then if you have a question, you can continue to type, or you can also raise your hand and we'll call on you. Okay. So I'm in the chat from long ago. One of the questions was about, can you require employees to be tested? You talked about vaccinations a little bit. Can you require employees to be tested and unvaccinated particularly?
You can require your employees to be tested. So this is going to a couple of areas to talk about that. If there was an exposure in the workplace, you have to let employees know that they can be tested. You have to give them that ability to, if they were close contact, to be tested. You might have an individual who is out and you want to require them to get a test. You can require that if you're going to pay for it, the employer, which most of those tests, there's no charge for at this time, but also for hourly non-exempt employees, it's paying for their time. and travel as well. So there is a cost involved in that. I do certainly have clients who, even if the employee is not required to be tested, they are requiring it, the employer's requiring it because they want to catch positives is the best way I can describe that. You know, they want to know, hey, employee is out and they have symptoms and they could just stay out for 10 days. But if I do a test and I catch a positive, that would let me know that I need to look at my workplace to figure out, were there any close contacts who need to be pulled out of the workplace and they need to be quarantined. So some employers, I know definitely I had some clients who were doing that because what they were finding is that it was slowly moving through their workplace and they were wanting to more quickly catch the positives in order to more quickly isolate and quarantine where needed.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think you talked about this a little bit, but in terms of any hope to ending accommodations, do you have any feel for when temporary periods will end around wearing masks? I think you might have gotten to that.
So I'm not quite sure the question is, it was for the accommodations.
Yeah.
And so if the question is when my accommodations for disability or religion end, I'm actually going to say, well, never. The accommodation has always been out there for where there is a workplace mandate, there's a requirement for you to consider through the accommodation process. The accommodation process doesn't mean you do exactly what the employee is asked for. It does mean you stop, you consider, is this something that we can reasonably accommodate? Is it an undue hardship or not? And so I would expect, I mean, that just is a continuation of what has always been. Certainly COVID has brought this to the forefront.
Right, thank you. Okay, so what is the current PTO requirements for employers to pay employees that get vaccines, and what pay rate?
So the vaccine, if you're looking at the vaccine, we want to go, let's go back a slide and get this onto the, so you can see that. Sorry, it's hard. I know when it goes so quickly. So if you are an employer with 26 or more employees in California, you're required to provide up to 2 weeks of the supplemental paid sick leave. And that the reasons for that is for the employee's own illness, to care for somebody else, and then vaccine related. So right off the poster, it is vaccine related. The covered employees attending a vaccine appointment or cannot work or telework due to a vaccine related symptoms. So what is the rate that you pay? That is a great question, and we could talk for an hour on this topic. You pay it at the regular rate of pay. And I don't mean the dictionary definition of regular. I don't mean base rate or hourly rate. I mean regular rate. It's a specific term. It's how you pay overtime. It's also how you pay California just regular paid sick leave down here. It's also how you pay missed meal and break penalty hours in California. The regular rate, it takes into consideration where an individual gets more than just their base hourly rate. Maybe in addition, they get bonuses or commissions or piece rate or multiple rates of pay. The regular rate is, in just a really simple term, an averaging of that time, so that they're getting paid at kind of the regular rate, which is it can be more than the hourly rate if they receive additional forms of compensation.
Great, thank you. Have you had any conversations with doctors' offices and regarding medical accommodations? We've heard and read that California doctors who issue medical accommodations for vaccines or masks are being targeted, even having their medical license threatened. I think this is a comment in many ways, but have you heard anything like that?
Well, I have, and actually we have many clients who are in the healthcare field. So, you know, we have podiatrists and we have pediatricians and we have general practice. So this is a continuation of what it's always been, is how I look at it. healthcare providers, whenever they've had to write accommodation recommendations or write ability to return to work documentation, they've always had to be professional, honest, and do their job. That's always how it's been. I can't speak to the being targeted. I would say that it's a continuation of they are charged with determining, is there a medical reason that an accommodation is being requested? And I do know from a few clients who have called in that some healthcare providers have told their employees, no, I'm not willing to write you that note. And so there is no medical accommodation. So yes, I have heard about that. And I think that's a continuation of how it's always been. We're just a little more aware of it right now, thinking about the disability accommodation.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to hop around a little bit. Michael Miller, I unmuted you, I think. There we are. So Michael Miller is from the California Association of Wine Growers and spends a lot of time doing policy work with the California legislature. And Michael, you had shared a comment. Do you want to share live?
Sure. SB 95 was the bill that created the supplemental paid leave earlier this year that expires on June 30th. In the last week of the legislative session, which is last week, there was a big discussion about extending that, making it apply only to vaccinated employees, not unvaccinated, reducing it from 2 weeks to 1 week, all kinds of conversation around it. Ultimately, the legislature didn't do anything with that at all. So that bill, that supplemental paid leave does expire on June 30th, and it cannot be extended through the legislature because they've already adjourned for the year. However, the governor could potentially extend it via executive order, and that could happen, anytime. And the courts have ruled that the governor has the ability to make law through executive order under the police powers of the administration. So it is possible. I don't know that they're looking at it one way or the other, but at this point in time, that law would go away on September 30th, and would have to take an executive action in order to extend it.
Thank you. And thank you for the behind the scenes look on that. I will tell you that pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time focusing on bills and where they were in the legislative process. And it's fascinating, if not a bit frightening, to follow a bill through the legislative process and see what gets added and deleted to it. I have to say that I have not been that focused during COVID because COVID's taken up so much of my time, but really interesting to hear that there were discussions around how to extend it past September 30th, a week or 2 weeks. That's really interesting to hear. And thank you. You're right. That legislative session has ended. So it won't be through a bill that becomes a law, but could be through an executive order. I don't know. If I were to guess, I would say that we might also be looking to see what comes up on the federal level as well. If there's some kind of an additional federal requirement, as well as the other side of the requirement was the federal tax credit allowance. So, there were two sides to that, but thank you. I really appreciate that,
So
information.
if I could offer one more thought with that too, and that would be that as you pointed out, that Calosha, the state of California, the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board would have to act on the federal ETS as well. So when they do that, they could extend it or expand upon it. They can't do anything less than the federal requirement, but they could do more. And that could potentially include supplemental paid leave in that. And that has to be done very quickly, as you point out, within 15 to 30 days. And I know that the board is already looking at that. And it's most likely that, I don't want to presuppose or guess, but realistically, it's most likely that the board would probably want to have two ETSs in place at the same time. One, there would be the existing ETS, which they may have to amend at some point soon. And the second ETS, which would be basically ratification of the federal ETS, which also may be expanded upon by the board. So all that's up in the air, but that is the other way that they could extend the paid leave law.
Yeah, and that's really an interesting piece of information too. The Calosha ETS, we were shocked back in June when it had a paid component to it, or even prior to June. But when the Calosha ETS came out, it had a paid component for those who weren't able to work because of exposure in the workplace. And everyone thought, why is Calosha saying that we have to pay employees? That's not Calosha's shtick. That's not what they're here for. And it was quickly pointed out that it was within their ability to have that kind of a mandate. So very, very interesting. We will all see where that goes. But many of my clients have found that the individual has exhausted the COVID leave, exhausted their own sick leave, exhausted their own vacation or PTO if they have it. And so any additional time off right now is unpaid, which is really challenging for a lot of employees, clearly, as well as employers, just getting enough bodies. All right, what do we have next, Kim?
So we have a bunch of questions. So we're going to have to go really fast now because we only have 5 minutes, but the questions are actually somewhat related. First, is there a good checklist available for investigating a workplace outbreak? There's so many questions. And maybe we need to create one if not.
Yeah, right. I think that for when it comes to what to do for an outbreak in the workplace, and you also have to report outbreaks to the local health department. So I think your Calosha emergency temporary standards is a great place to go. You can kind of walk through what do you do if there has been a workplace exposure. And it will go through, is it a minor exposure or is it a more serious exposure? That probably is one of the best. The challenge that I think we all have is we want a quick answer. Like we want this great check sheet. So we make a checklist sheet, but then the government changes the source document, if you will. And that now makes our checklist outdated. And the same is true with websites. You will find, if you work with me, you know that I don't often send websites as like a PDF. I want to send the live link because if that page has updated, I want it to be able to update. I know personally that has been my priority of keeping as up to date as I possibly can is by keeping source document wherever possible. Sometimes even the local health departments, there are many of them, their websites are all different. If you have if you have locations in multiple counties, you know what I'm talking about. They're all different. Some are better than others or more easy to read. They change constantly. And they might even have links on their pages to an outdated California or federal site. So I want you to stick to kind of source documents wherever possible.
Okay. So really quickly, CDC recommends masking for vaccinated exposed until tested or 14 days. Does CDPH differ?
Duration of vaccinated, well, so let's go up and look, and I'm okay spending a little bit more time for those of you who want to stay on. So you said quarantined for vaccinated. So as long as they don't have symptoms, they don't need to quarantine. But then down here, they should monitor for COVID-19 and adhere to all non-pharmaceutical interventions. So this is CDPH, California. Which means wearing a mask, maintaining distance, washing your hands, avoiding crowds for 14 days. So perhaps you thought I was talking about the federal CDC, or those are in alignment, and this clarifies that yes, California does recommend this for the 14 days. Kim, you're muted.
Sorry. If there are no infections or cases in the workplace, yet an employee claims workplace exposure, is that something the employer should dispute?
Well, the employer should contact their workers' comp carrier immediately. So one of your players in your resource of smart people who help you is your workers' comp carrier. So if an employee says it's work-related, you tell your workers' comp carrier. The same as if an employee says that their neck hurts and they think it's work-related. Whether you think it's because of work or not does not matter. You just go through a process. The process will take care of the details. The experience that I'm having with clients and their workers' comp carriers is they're on it. The comp carrier does the contact tracing. The comp carrier determines, we know what else is going on in your life. Going to any weddings lately? Tell me about your family members. And actually, so far, the claims for work related have been successfully disputed for many of my clients because of the contact tracing. And that is in no way I don't want to say that workplace exposure isn't happening or isn't important. It of course is. We also have to acknowledge that exposure and actually contracting COVID can come from many different areas. So there is this process already in place for workers' comp to determine, is it work related or not? But there's also a time clock ticking. They have to dispute or accept that claim within a specific amount of time. So you want to really make sure that you're calling your workers' comp carrier as soon as you can. The claim has to be rejected within 45 days or 30 days for first responders. So time is really important. You never say to an employee, I don't think you got it from work, you're a liar. You would never say that. We're good people. But you would certainly let your workers' comp carrier know and follow their recommendation.
Great, thank you. Two more that I know about. Currently, there's a scenario at work. We have an employee whose wife tested positive and he states he tested negative. Employee states he's fully vaccinated. However, he's having a daily exposure to his wife. Can we require him to quarantine or to get tested? So then we go back to this, right?
Yeah, so gosh, there's a lot to unpack there. We actually
There
need
is.
another half an hour on that. Because, okay, a few things here. First of all, he says he's vaccinated. So employers have the right to ask employees if they're vaccinated or not. Some employers aren't gathering that information, which I'd recommend you do. TPO recommends you do, because if there's a workplace exposure, you treat vaccinated differently than unvaccinated. It is okay to ask employees their vaccination status. Some employers will say, I need you to bring me a document or a picture or the California code, QRC code, in order to write it into our files. Other clients are just having employees attest to it. Those are your choices if you're not required otherwise by a regulation. So when the question says an employee says that he's vaccinated, well, might be time for you to look at, do we want to change how we know about people's vaccination status? We don't recommend keeping a photocopy of the card, but we do recommend that if you are going to want to be able to show at some point that you did your due diligence in determining vaccination status and even ensuring that the information was supported by documentation, you would ask to see that. If an individual says, nope, I'm not gonna bring you my card, I'm not even gonna tell you if I'm vaccinated, no problem, you treat them as unvaccinated. So unvaccinated, they're quarantining for the full, which is not this slide, that would be the slide up. They're going to quarantine for the 10 days unless they get a test after day 7. I'm sorry, on day 5 or later, they can come back after day 7. So in that scenario, it's just making me think, if an individual tells you they have had close contact, do you just believe them and they're out? Or is there a way for you to know more about their vaccination status in order to know which rule you apply to their situation?
Good. Thank you, Melissa. Do we have that? Are there all the questions I see written, unless I missed someone? Does anybody want to put their hands up and ask a question? This is a lot.
Looks like it looks like we've dropped, so people, I know they're on to either their next meeting or they're
Yeah.
on to lunch. I really appreciate having been here. If there's a question that you have that I didn't get to, you are welcome to email me here. My email address is on the slide if you would like that, or give me a call. That's fine. I mean, literally, you can call or email and say, hey, that program you did today, I didn't quite get my question answered. I'm happy to answer that for you, or certainly attempt to. And if there's other, you've got a lot of training opportunities out there, a lot of information. It's about finding people who you feel confident are providing the answers in a way that are helpful. So I hope that I was able to help in this process and make it a little easier and hopefully not more overwhelming than it already was.
Melissa, thank you so much for your generosity of knowledge and spirit. That's just awesome. And thank you, Maricela and Amelia, for your interpretation. Yay. So you will get an email from kimstemler@gmail.com sometime this afternoon. And it will include a link to the presentation, and the presentation has all of those wonderful links, including Melissa's email. You'll get a link to the recording, and then I will also link to the Monterey County Vaccine website, where we're adding a lot of these business resources, so you can easily find them if you lose this email for some reason. We're interested in serving you. We're interested in just keeping our economy going and keeping our community healthy. So if there's anything we can do to continue to support you, please let me know. And thanks for spending your, Tuesday? It feels like Thursday, Tuesday morning with us. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Dan, Kim. It's nice to spend time with you.
Thank you, Melissa.